Welcome to this week's episode of the And Both podcast. I am joined by Tori Johnston. She is a consultant. She is a mom. She is doing many things at once, as many of the women on the show are. Her episode this week, we're talking about women in leadership positions, and not just in leadership as in important to fill the role, but important to fill the role and also help to create the culture around motherhood and work that many of us are looking for and talking about and seeking out. So in the episode, we talk a lot about balancing work and parenting, how skills in motherhood translate to corporate life and how that translate to career and upper level management and executive positions. And then because it is top of mind right now in so many conversations, especially in the US, affordable and accessible childcare and the impact that that has on women in the workplace and mothers in the workplace. So it was just a great conversation with somebody who has had a different experience in a corporate setting than one that I came up in, but there's so many similarities. And I think that that's really important to hear and understand that even if it looks differently for one than the other, that there are these common threads that come through. So enjoy this week. And again, if you love the episode, please rate and review, leave us some feedback about it, because it helps to spread the word. And the more conversations we can put out into the world and the more people that can hear them, and the more community we're going to be able to find and grow. So enjoy. Hello and welcome to the And Both podcast. Here we are going to hear from moms and those in motherhood that are doing the thing that works for them. They are honoring themselves alongside the all-encompassing role and level of expectation that is motherhood. And we are going to hear from as many different people as possible in their own experience. So you can find people to relate to. You can hear stories that will make you laugh, make you cry, all of the above, and that we will come together as a community to support one another in a way that is holistic and honoring of the woman and the mother as a whole. Hello and welcome back to the And Both podcast. I am here today with Tori Johnston. Welcome and thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
So let's start with you, given your own intro. Let people know who you are and what do you want people to know?
Thank you. My name's Tori Johnston. I live in Laguna Beach, California, with my husband and my 3.5-year-old son. I have really spent the past 15 years of my life in the marketing and advertising world. I'm originally from Minneapolis, Minnesota, and spent some years there after college, moved to New York City to follow my dreams in advertising, and absolutely loved my 20s in New York and ended up coming to California for another role about 6 years ago. So now we call Laguna Beach, California home, and this is my little pocket of paradise. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here, and it's a lovely place to raise a family and call home.
Yeah, I mean, just like behind you, it's bright, even though it's it's also the afternoon.
I work in my basement on my Zoom calls all day. And sometimes I step out and realize, oh my gosh, I'm in the most beautiful place in the world. So need a little perspective here and there.
Right. You're like, terrible day. Oh, look, there's the patio. Not right. Always as bad. Oh my gosh, that's so funny.
I do have.
That is pretty awesome. So 3.5. So how is that all going? How does that interface with what you do in your day-to-day?
People say this all the time, but every phase is different. I've found the 3 to 3.5 age really, really fun because personality is just like shining through. A very extroverted, social, fun, and funny little 3-year-old guy named Bo. And he is an absolute blast. With that, I think it comes a lot of challenges of just wanting FaceTime with you. Like if I'm on my phone or if I'm responding to an email or not paying attention to him, he'll tell me, "Mommy, listen to me," or "You're not listening." He's starting to learn those phrases that I think he hears at school or from us, and he's using them back on me, which is kind of crazy. They observe everything. And so this age has been really fun because that personality and the verbal skills are just, off the charts, but it really comes back to haunt you in certain ways when your child tells you you're not listening, and I actually wasn't listening.
Yeah. Oh my God. I know. And like when they sort of like dial something in, like a new phrase. So my youngest is 4 And this was maybe only a couple of months ago. He turned 4 in March, and only a couple of months ago. And he was upset about something. And I was like, what is going on? He was like, I want to have a conversation about this. And like, to hear a 4-year-old use the word conversation was the cutest and most like, oh my God, all of these things still keep like sinking in, right? Like the stuff that you say.
They just absorb everything. So this age is really, really fun. I find it more challenging, I actually think, than like the newborn baby phase, which I liked, but definitely a little easier now that they can communicate and that we can set expectations. We've completely given up nap time, and it's honestly been really freeing because I'm not trying to force my entire day or weekend around a nap, although you get zero downtime and there's no extra hour in the day to get anything done or rest yourself. I think it's opened up my weekends to be more enjoyable, I guess, than they used to be.
Yeah. There's like, it's like that whole, like, you know, the second half of your life piece, like, you know, when it comes to anything, but like, I truly believe that the second half of that period of like early childhood begins, and like, you can start to see the light when you no longer are ruled by the clock. Like when it's not like, okay, do I have to do the math backwards? Like if he's got to be asleep at 10 or in his room at 10 or wherever he's going to be napping at 10 and it's like 7:30 now, I actually have like, oh shoot, I should have started 12 minutes ago. And you're like, oh my God, I'm tired. I'm just so tired trying to figure this all out.
I know. That's actually a really good point. I think I've held myself to the clock thing my entire life. I was a college athlete. I've always just been like a highly productive employee and just work really hard, but always keeping track of the clock. And I think with kids, you're right. I'm like, if it's not 6:30 and we're not going down to bath time, like I feel like the night is off track, but it's fine. I just need to remind myself of that because if they take an extra 20 more minutes to go to bed or they want to hang out in the bathtub longer, like I'm always trying to fit the clock that I made up in my mind. Nobody else is following that clock, by the way. It's just my clock. And that's been hard for me to give up. I think it comes from like overproductivity in other parts of my life that I'm trying to do the same thing as a parent.
Yeah. And does your partner, are they also a clock watcher?
He is not. And I think this is constantly, it's made up in my head. The clock is in my head. I'm like, we're going to be late. He's like, what's telling us we're going to be late? Or what's telling us we need to go downstairs right now?
Yes. This is my theory. Like, you know, there are people that like empty the dishwasher and people that like have their own way of like filling the dishwasher and all this. And like those two people get married, right? Like a clock watcher and a non-clock watcher will always find each other. It's like the magnetic personality, like time anxiousness.
We live like 2 miles from our daycare where our son is. And we drive through this canyon traffic in Laguna Beach that's even more busy in the summer with tourism and, you know, beach traffic and things. Every day there's traffic. You never know what you're going to get. We live in Southern California. There is always traffic. But for some reason, I feel this like intense, like we better get in the car now. Otherwise we're going to miss our child at daycare. Like they're not going to close the daycare. Every parent's in traffic. My kid's not going to be outside sitting by himself, you know, waiting on the corner. But like it feels like, it feels like that every day because of this made up clock in my mind. Although it's never happened. The threat of like not making it there on time is present every single day for me.
Yeah. Yeah. So my husband is a clock watcher and it like really stresses him out. And I pre-children was like, all right, no, like we're going to leave and we're going to do this and blah, blah, blah. And now I'm just like, listen, man, we're going to get there. It's going to happen. Yeah. And he's just like the lead up starts and I'm like, okay, you're going to have to go manage yourself because I am not managing that situation. And so it is so common. It is so common. I've got a friend who's 15 minutes late or early for everything, like early. And it's just like hilarious because we're like, oh, you know, come over at noon. And then I'm like, oh, it's 11:45. They're here. And, you know, they're like, his wife is like, here we are. We've already driven around the neighborhood for 10 minutes because we couldn't be that early. It's just like this thing.
That's so funny. I did, when I was on maternity leave, I do remember like the baby bliss of being a little bit, you know, constantly confused what day and time it was. But my husband was home for that time too. And we both, I remember, watched the 3rd hour of the Today Show. And we were like, I've never seen this hour of the Today Show. It's basically a repeat of everything that's happened all day long for the people that are up at or watching the news at 10:30 in the morning. And I was like, oh my God, I've never seen this before. But then we started to look forward to it. because we were like in this fog earlier in the morning, and I'll be like, oh, 10:30's on. Now you can watch the third hour of the Today Show. So anyways, we look back at that fondly. I don't think I've watched it since, but.
Right. Like the TV might as well fall out the window at that point in the day because it's just like too many things. So you work from home, and does your husband work from home as well?
He does. And he has an interesting career where he's a travel writer. So he'll be gone for a while and go on big trips. And then other times he'll be home, working from home, and have, more flexibility in his schedule. I start my day pretty early. I'm a marketing consultant, and I work with teams pretty much in the US and Canada only, but still on West Coast time. You're meeting the East Coast time halfway through their morning. So I try to be, up and going by 7.
Yeah, what time does your daycare open then to be able to
They open at 8. So my husband usually does the morning drop off, and I try to do the afternoon. But people always ask about East Coast versus West Coast. And I'm like, because I lived in New York, I always have that early bird gets the worm mentality that no matter how early you're up, even with kids on the West Coast, you really can't be the first one to start the day. You know, even if you're up at 6 a.m. here, it's 9 a.m. in New York.
Yeah. But I feel like that's kind of nice, right? Like that kind of, it's like I'm on the East Coast, and I really enjoy the fact that if I am working with somebody that's on the West Coast, I can write all the emails and stuff like that later in the day. I'm a little bit more of a night person, and then I get up in the morning, and they're generally everything is waiting in my inbox just because of how the time works. And I'm like, so I can get that stuff done instead of me being let's send out all the emails and try and connect with people there.
I would say I go to bed at night feeling more complete than when I lived on the East Coast, because I felt like when I was on the East Coast, things could still happen throughout the day that you could maybe respond to as you're going to bed, and it's still not quite, that late on the West Coast. But now I'm when I shut my computer at night, I really feel like I've done everything I can, and whatever I wake up to is whatever you wake up to.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so marketing. So you've done that for ever and ever, right? It's 15 years you've been in that?
I've worked for a bunch of different companies. I started my career in a Fortune 500 company working for a marketing advertising department. That job brought me to New York. And the second that I got into New York, my eyes were wide open to the boutique fitness boom that was happening. I've been a big fitness lover my entire life, and it was happening before my eyes in the mid 2010s in New York. So I joined SoulCycle as a marketing manager and really just grew with the company as they grew and exploded in popularity. So that was really my first chance at being a leader, leading teams, leading big, departments, big budgets, things like that. And really just rode the wave of that incredible brand as they grew. I had an incredible experience there. And then I worked for another company called Extend Bar. And then after that company, I moved to California to join Exponential Fitness. They're the largest fitness franchisor in the world. And I was the CMO of their dance brand. And most recently was at another company CMO of a company called MyoDetox. It's physical therapy and chiropractic brand. And now I'm consulting, which is actually really fun, still mostly in the fitness and wellness space. But I just love being able to, use all of my experience and then just go in and try to help businesses that are maybe, in these growth or adolescent times to help really build the success they're looking for.
Yeah. So did you come into the fitness? What happened first? Was it the fitness piece, or was it the marketing piece that drew you into that space?
That's a really good question. I've always loved fitness, but never really thought that I would be a personal trainer. That really wasn't my aspiration. And when I had this opportunity to join SoulCycle, it really was mixing marketing with fitness. So I guess marketing came first, and then fitness was the cherry on top. And now I feel like I can't leave. I've been in this industry for so long, and I feel so passionately about it. And I'm consulting now for a franchise brand, and I really do love franchising for the reason that it allows a lot of people that come into the franchise network to be their own entrepreneurs. So I work with a lot of women that also own fitness franchises that have kids, that are working moms, that maybe used to have a former career as a marketing executive too. And now they're building their dream, which is to open, a fitness concept in their hometown. So it's really fun to see those paths kind of converge. And I find a lot of people are at similar life stages that I am.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting too, because you're was your son born in California then?
He was. Yep. We lived here. It was April of 2021. Yes, that's right.
Oh, great time.
Well, end of March. He was due in April. He's born in March. So March 2021.
Yep.
But I was working for Exponential Fitness at the time. And yeah, it's an interesting time to have kids, definitely, but also just interesting to be, a female executive that goes back to work 12 weeks after you have a baby and dives right into all of the world that was happening with COVID. And that did not do very well for the fitness industry. So it was a tough time to be problem solving.
Yeah, I was going to say, how did that go? Because if you're, a lot of those companies, they depend on people being in person.
I
I
was in
mean, in
person,
terms,
which was fine. Yeah, but it was definitely tough. Like it was constantly a pivot. What are we going to do to bring more revenue into these stores? What are we going to do to continue our online services? How do we bridge, in person versus online versus omni-channel? So it really was a stretch for me at work, but also a stretch at home as you're becoming a new parent and you're returning to work and dropping your kid off at daycare. And, luckily my husband actually stayed home with our son for the first year. But after that, it was definitely a transition of how do you make this all work within the hours of the day that you have childcare?
yeah, well, especially too, like if he's a travel writer, like there's no travel to be, I mean,
Yeah, exactly.
initially,
So
there's
that's why
nothing to,
he ended up stayed home with our son for the first year, which was great. I was so lucky that they could have that special relationship. Jealous at times, like I would come home from the office and they've done all these fun things together during the day, but also, can't underestimate how much effort goes into taking care of a 0 to 1 year old all day, every day. So I was very
yeah.
thankful for that, but it's definitely kind of growing. I think one thing I was reflecting on recently with friends was like, when you, or at least for me, when I got our son was in daycare and then he's now going to start this new preschool, like nothing lasts forever. It's such a short amount of time, but I put so much emphasis on like that. Where are they going to go and what are we going to do and what time's the drop off and all of those things that it felt consuming, but these people have just become the greatest resource for us in our life. The people at the daycare, the preschool teachers, the babysitter on a Saturday or Friday night. We've used all of those outlets and it's been fantastic.
Do you have family in California?
We don't. My family is back in the Midwest and my husband's family is in Boston. So we've been out here kind of on our own, but luckily we have family that loves to visit. Again, it's a lovely place to visit all year round. And so oftentimes, our parents will come out for several weeks at a time to hang with us and see our son and get away from the winter.
Yeah, especially like the rain grayness that is New England in January.
Exactly. So we're lucky to have very supportive and loving family, but I also remind everybody we live in a beautiful place. Our doors are always open. So it's been pretty fun to embrace that.
That's awesome. So when you went back into work, like did you at the executive level of going back into work, how was that transition for you like as an individual versus, I mean, there's the COVID layer of all of that, but like how did that transition go once you became a mom?
I actually think that looking back, I'm like, I think I handled it pretty well, but I do remember a specific moment when I was sitting at a stoplight, going to work, getting ready to take a left-hand turn and waiting for the arrow to go. And I was like, if I close my eyes right now, I'm going to fall asleep. Like I would fall asleep in the car if my body let me for a second. And there were those times where you're like, I'm just so tired, I need to rest, but there's no rest in the day until you get home. And then you parent for 90 minutes before you put your kid to bed. And I mean, anybody who's a parent knows that the hours between 5 and 6 are not my best hours and they're not the kids' best hours either. So they're tired all day. They're ready for bed. You're tired and you're hungry and you're tired and all of those things. So definitely a learning curve on how to prioritize my rest and well-being. But I feel like it was just trial by fire on that. Like nothing I could have done would have set me up differently, but I was exhausted.
Yeah. I mean, for sure. Hands in the air all around the planet. And I think about like, is there looking back on the experience now that you've slept and now that you have like sort of like caught your wings or whatever the phrase is there something that like if you look back on that time and you're like, I really wish that this had been available so that would have made not necessarily all the difference, but like is there one or a couple things where you're like, that would have been clutch to have that in my space then?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think if I would have had more childcare, I would have worked more. It's not like I would have taken more time in that moment to be like, oh, I'm going to sleep in more. I'm going to take a rest. Like I just mentally wasn't set up for that. So it's just, the survival of parent work, parents bed. And I think if I would have had more resources or help in the moment, I don't think it would have allowed me to rest more. I think I just would have worked more, which is like my own just obsession with working my butt off. But if it was specific things, I think it all comes down to the flexibility from your employer. Like people just realizing that your kids get sick and they go to the doctor a lot. It's like, I did have that support for my team, but it's definitely not widely recognized that, all of a sudden you have to take the next available appointment at a pediatrician that's 20 miles away so that you can make sure you're not ending up in the ER tonight. Like that kind of stuff that I think is just completely throws a wrench in your day as a professional, but is, you would give yourself a really hard time if you couldn't make that happen as a mom. So I wrestled with that a little bit, and I think things have gotten better on the doctor front, but just in general, it happens so often.
Yeah. Yeah. I think about that, like in what would make the difference in terms of, and I think that you are not in the minority to say, if I had more resources available in terms of like hands-on childcare, that the idea that you would put it back into work, because that's the driven. I mean, you don't get to be an executive at a company that grows like SoulCycle did, and that like all of these other companies, by being like, yeah, I'm just going to take the afternoon. You know what I mean? Like there is that, like the people that are like, yeah, I'm good, thanks, they're not hanging out in your office.
Yeah, it's tough, but I've learned to grow through that a little bit and just be more conscious of when I would do that, when I would lean into working more than I probably should have.
Yeah. And that was, like, so the question I have about that is like, is there a way do you feel like there's an opportunity for conversation in the workplace prior to maternity leave that would help you set up to like, this is how this, even if it's not, it's not going to be a conversation with like your HR representative who's like, okay, you're going to go here and then you come back and then this, but like having conversations with people where it's like, these are ways that a lot of people feel impacted by this. And these are like just sort of helping you have an on-ramp back to work that's not as self-imposed, right? Because like you put your, like you put yourself in your own parameters.
Exactly. I'm always shocked that employers, any company, big or small, when somebody goes on maternity leave, it's like a huge surprise. And it's like, there are women that are in childbearing age, let's say, with air quotes, in every organization. And whenever somebody announces that they're going on maternity leave or that they're pregnant, it's just like this huge shock. And it should come as no shock to anyone that people want to have a child and return to work. So that being said, I think the preparation for that is always just like, it's process oriented. It's not people oriented. And so sometimes employers are helpful with the process. Sometimes they're not. And most of the time, the people part of it is completely left to, your own experience as a parent or a mom. And so I've seen I've seen little to no support on the people side of becoming a parent as an employee. And now that I consult for a company that's largely run by women and female founded and female executives, it's really interesting because although people are at different stages of parenting and different stages of life, everyone realizes that the job will get done because that's what moms do. And it's a little bit less of, on the hours of the clock or on the hours of the business, and more of the job will get done because that's what we know happens here. And this is the expectations you hold yourself to. But if it gets done after the daycare incident or the doctor's appointment, like that is completely acceptable. And I think that only comes from having moms as executives. So now I have that responsibility whenever I hire a team or build a brand, that's the way that I need to lead too. And I don't think that there's any other way around that unless you put women in leadership positions.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Amen from the rooftops, because I think that that's true. Like you can't, it's like that whole, like the notion around like people going back into the office, right? It was like when people were out of the office, they were out of the office because they couldn't go back in the office because everything was closed because of COVID. And then they went back into the office, and all of a sudden that like that idea that people have sort of floated around forever is like remote work really means that people are going to work like an hour a day and they're going to like take advantage of blah, blah, blah. So like we need to make sure that we have eyes on them and we can see them and they're like sitting at their desk and all that stuff. And it's like,
Totally.
you're sitting at your desk, but like you're not productive just because you're sitting at that desk. And I love the idea of giving people the benefit of the doubt. Like, and especially I think this is where there's like a strength in motherhood when it comes to that is like, all right, I might have like 19 things flying through my head like a ticker tape, but like they will all get done and it may not look like forward progress in the moment. However, if you tell me that like this presentation is next Friday, it's going to get done. Like all of it will get done. If you tell me that I need to do this, this, and this each of these days, that bothers me because I may not be able to make that progress. However, in the end, we're going to get there.
Absolutely. I completely agree with that. And I think being a parent and a woman makes you better at communicating when it comes to things like that, because you know your limits, or at least you've tested them enough to have learned that you can get the presentation done next Friday. You just need to be able to move like certain tasks in your day around, which isn't necessarily the way it should be designed. I don't know if that's the best way, but that's why women are so efficient. I believe in the multitasking thing, but I also just think it's this efficiency of running a household and running a business that are very similar.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's that idea of like sort of like the fire that needs to be addressed in the moment, and it's going to change. Like maybe right now, like that Friday presentation is not something that I can do until Monday because it's the like 2 weeks before. However, thank you for putting it on my like radar, and it will like I will find it. I just love when people give people the respect of like being grown-ups when they get to this age and stage of their career. And even if you're not in an executive position, like I truly think that at the end of the day, people want to go to work and they want to do a good job, whatever that is. Right. And so like, but people also want to be seen as people. So like if you go into work and they do a really good job of helping like check all the boxes for your maternity leave, but then you come back and someone asks you how your vacation is, it's like, okay.
Yes. Yes. Very much so. That's a very good point. I think too, I was desperately wanting to be seen as a person and not just a person who'd had a baby when I came back. Although I loved showing pictures and I was so proud, and you can't wait to just like, and you think about your child all day, every day when you first return to work, or at least I did. I desperately wanted somebody to ask me anything other than being a mom, even though that was the most interesting thing that had happened to me in the past 6 months. It wasn't my only value to being there in the room. And so I try really hard now to do that with other parents, which is just like ask anything else other than their kids. Ask them anything interesting that's happening that doesn't have to do with being a parent. And at work too, I'm like, if they want to bring up their kids, like, or what's going on in their personal life, that's great. But I tried really hard to like not make that the go-to as a female in a conversation and start asking about kids. For one, I know men don't get that as much. And two, I like give them a little bit of distance from that if they can. Like we all need a little distance at times from just having our mom hats on.
Yeah. And I think too, like you get into that element of like salt in a wound, right? Like if you are someone who is coming back to work and people only want to talk about the baby, and you only are like, you're trying to like, I want to be here and I want to like be focused on this while I'm here. And people are like, let's talk about this baby. And you're like, I want a hot poker in my eye, not because I don't care about my kid, but because like it is actual not great situation internally, and I'm just trying to focus on this so I can get to that space. Like,
yes, exactly.
Yeah, that identity of mom, like, and that's the idea, right? Is like you have a baby and all of a sudden you are a mom who also has a job versus like you are Tori and you have all of these other identities and they're all circles that overlap in different ways, but like you're not mom who also happens to be Tori.
Yes, exactly. I saw memes or on Instagram somewhere that was like a mom who's traveling for work and she was in an Uber, and the Uber driver was asking her like, who's taking care of the kids? And her whole joke was like, no one has ever asked a guy when they get in the car in an Uber from the airport who's watching the kids ever. Never does that happen ever. But it's just assumed, for one, that if you're there, that somebody's watching your kids. And two, that like it is the mom's responsibility to have arranged the childcare for somebody to be watching her kids while she's traveling or traveling for work. So I still don't know what the the solve is for that. But I just try to allow everybody that I work with to have that separation where they need it, and not just assume that because they're traveling that they need to be in charge of scheduling their children as well.
Yes. Yes, I think so too. I was at a trade show in New York last summer, and I'm there with like products, right? And I'm there to talk about products, and I'm there to like meet people and all of this stuff. And I didn't have like pictures of my kids or anything like that up there, but people are like, asking about how these things got developed. And it naturally came up that because it was inspired by trying to sort of organize all the stuff in my house in terms of like scheduling and blah blah blah. Conversations over. Well, where are your kids now? Well, they're here. They're just running around the convention center. I mean, there's 20,000 people here. Like, I don't know. Let me know if you see them. No, like they're at home. And it's like,
Yeah.
well, how many kids do you have? And like, how old are your kids? And, oh, wow, like, can your husband handle that? And I'm like, what?
I know.
It's so tired.
It is. It really is. I'm really trying personally to not go down the easy path with conversations like that. It's always like people say, stop talking about the weather. And I'm like, yep, I agree. We started this talking about how beautiful California is, but like, stop talking about the weather. Stop talking about like asking people about their kids. For me, I'm like, stop talking about potty training. No one wants to hear about potty training, but I find myself talking about it all the time. And my other one is like, stop talking about allergies, even though everybody has allergies. I'm like, it's just such a boring topic. Nobody wants to know about runny noses. And
yes. Yeah.
Yep. So I'm trying. I need to like write this on my mirror at home. But yeah, it does get really tired really fast. And I hope that like there's a better future for that kind of stuff when it comes to parents and how they're treated in the workplace. They're treated at trade shows and conventions and travel and all of it.
Yeah. And too, like, you're really missing out on getting a chance to really meet people if they just become that one label.
Yep. Absolutely. Like just ask people more interesting questions. Be the more interesting person in the room.
Yeah, exactly. So when you are not doing all of these things, when you are not potty training and living in beautiful California and all of those things, like what is the stuff that is core to you? What are the things that you do? What I always say this when I used to work clinically, I'd be like, tell me what you do for fun. And people are like, I have children, or like I have grandchildren, or like I have a job. And I'm like, no. Like when you're not working and you're not obligated and you're not whatever, like what do you do? What is your thing or things?
That's a great question. And I actually think that's a perfect thing for a lot of parents and new parents to think about, because it does take intention to answer that when you are consumed by these other things. But I truly am like an internal optimist. I'm very positive. I love to, find joy in what I'm doing in the 24 hours of the day. And to find my joy, I love to be active. I think that's why I'm drawn to the fitness industry. But to me, like going on a walk or going to a fitness class or working out in my basement are the moments of joy for me personally, where I can move my body. I think that comes from, years of loving fitness and workouts, but also just knowing that I can not look at a screen, close my eyes, listen to music, and have, that burst of endorphins. I also, on the flip side of that, love to read. I was never, I would say, like the best student in middle school and high school. I never read for fun at that age. I hated everything that was assigned. But once I started reading in my adult life for pleasure, as they say, I absolutely am just like a ferocious reader. So I read everything from business books to like entrepreneurial journeys, but mostly like just the fun beach reads of the summer, whatever the hot New York Times books are. I'm in a book club here in Laguna Beach, and we actually have a library in our house. And I am a ferocious reader. So besides working out and reading, those are my two biggest hobbies, I would say. And traveling when I can, sometimes jumping on cool trips with my husband, if not just traveling as a family.
That's cool. I like that, because it also too, like that really more aligns with, I feel like you said that you were an athlete in high school? In college?
Yeah, in college. Mm-hmm.
What did you? Oh my gosh, you are nuts.
Maybe that's why I'm like, I need early bird gets the worm, but
there you go.
I was a rower for the University of Kansas.
See, there's the thing. So I went to school in Boston, and I used to work in a restaurant, and we would have like the head of the Charles was there. And I got elbowed. I'm not short. I'm like 5'4". I'm not a
Yeah.
giant. I got elbowed in the forehead by a rower standing there. And I was just like, of all the things on the bingo card of my life, this is not one of them. But all like people that I knew in college that were like up at God knows what hour of the morning and they're out there
Yes.
running, and like rowing is not easy, and it is
No, it's a
not
very
like,
difficult sport.
it is a very difficult sport. And but there is such a camaraderie around this like shared pain that goes along with it. So it's rowing is one of those things that's like super fascinating to me, as like I think a lot of it has to do with the like old-timey New England-ness
Yeah,
where a lot of that comes from. But how did you end up in Kansas for rowing?
I know, right? I actually grew up my entire life dancing. And so I was kind of long, lean, coordinated dancer. And I went to the University of Kansas before my freshman year for like, I don't know, like a meet the campus day or something, or orientation. And the coach came up to me and said, would you want to walk on the team as a lightweight single or doubles rower? I'd never rowed in my life. And so they
Awesome.
like brought me on, taught me how to do it. And I ended up walking onto the team and became a scholarship athlete, which was incredible. But it just came from teaching you that absolute the skills that are needed to rowing, but just like having that absolute discipline, I think is what they were looking for. Like it's rowing is the same motion over and over and over again, like very different than, ball sports or other team sports. And so it's very repetitive and probably easier to teach somebody how to do, but just takes incredible endurance. So I loved it. It was a great experience to represent the university, to have, a different walk through college for sure, but a very, like, I look back on it with very fond memories.
That is cool. You're like the like Courtney Cox, Bruce Springsteen concert of Kansas.
I
Like,
guess. I guess.
hey, you.
Meanwhile, there is one body of water in Kansas. It's a gross river, so we would travel a lot of places. People are like, I didn't even know there was rivers or rowing in Kansas, but I'm excited to watch it in the Olympics coming up this summer. And so it's a really cool sport to watch, and then
Yeah.
obviously cheering on Team USA.
I know. I do love watching rowing in the Olympics because it's like, it's unbelievably, like, it's unbelievable to me that people that are like, especially when you get like the 8-man or the 8-person and they are like inches apart from each other. It's
Yeah.
like to think like you have 8 people that are all moving in such a coordinated way,
Yeah.
boat, that it's like this crazy tie situation. It's fascinating. It's totally fascinating to me.
I'm glad that you're a big rowing fan now. That's great.
Yeah, yeah. But I also like I mean that also tracks too, right? Like where it's like you have to be up and you have to be there on time, because if you're not there, your boat is gone and you are not in the boat.
Yes, a lot of repercussions for not being on time. I think maybe that is why I'm so obsessed with the clock. But I thought the sport would translate into my later years, but it was not something I was going to pick up in New York. And since living here, it just hasn't been as accessible. But I keep on thinking like maybe in retirement someday, I'll get back into rowing.
Yeah. I'm in New Hampshire, and there are like teams of people in their like 60s that they get up and they go and they row like before school, like at UNH and stuff like that. I'm always like, that has got to be the cutest thing. Like a group of old professors there. I imagine like a lot of like worn out wool sweaters and like some sort of varsity letter and like
totally.
I think that's so cute, and also like very Dead Poet Society.
Oh, totally
trending. Oh my gosh.
Awesome.
So when you think about like as things, we're talking about like, or we talked about like the change and like how the evolution of things go, like where do you see the evolution going for you in terms of like, as you're like, your son is older and you're like now moving into that like preschoolish phase, and, you're in the consultant realm now and stuff like that. Like what's your hope evolution wise for that?
Yeah, I feel really grounded that we love where we live and we love our community. I'm thankful for that every day. We love our house. We love the street we live on. We love the community we live in. And we honestly stay in our little pocket. We just drive around in little circles. I feel like on a 1 mile radius. And that feels really grounding because I know that we're going to be here hopefully forever. And so part of that is like, I just want to embrace raising our son in this place that we love so much. And I want him to realize how lucky he is to grow up here. And so I am really trying to establish roots here. I mean, we've been here for a while, but to find new friends here, to find other families that we really get along with, to volunteer for organizations that mean something to us, to support the local community. It's a big arts community. And although I'm not artistic, I love everybody else that is. And there's some things that just like really matter to us about this community that I see myself investing in. But that being said, want to continue my career in consulting or be in-house at a company working in marketing. But I want to be able to step away and also enjoy these years of, adolescence with our son. I love the fact that like we can drop him off at school. He can have a great day. I know he's getting a great education, and I know that will come with challenges at some point too. But I feel like it's just in this tight-knit community where I know that he'll be, raised by people and around a community that loves him. And I hope that that's what we continue to do.
Yeah, I think that's like that. The value of that cannot be overstated. Like the belief that when you leave your child in the care of wherever it is, whether it's like daycare or school or babysitter, whatever that setup is, that like when their hand leaves your hand or you hand them over, that that person is keeping your kid safe. And that's the ability, that's the like how you can get down to a baseline where you're able to like focus and really be all in on what you're doing when they're not there, because that they are getting their needs met and you don't have to think about it.
Absolutely. And when you were saying earlier, like what could have made the transition from maternity leave to work easier, what I actually think is another huge rubbing point for parents is this like daycare to preschool to now kindergarten phase for working parents. Like California just mandated TK, so pre-K, basically toddler pre-K for all school districts in the state of California. And that's through public school. So my son could technically, when he's, I think it's 3.5 to 4, can go to public school for this half day TK course. And I'm like, that is a huge weight lift off parents' shoulders, for one, from a, physical expense, but also just an option for them to go to a safe place with, surrounded by education and community and family. And so I think more things like that I think would be really, really helpful, because those are the childcare options put a lot of stress on parents, and it is a huge financial burden, as we all know.
Yeah, for sure. And I think too, like what you're saying about having that ability to be in a space, it helps with their transition too, right? Like they're not, school is a long time and you're there for a long time, especially in elementary school. But I also think about like, so I grew up in Canada. I moved here in high school, but I grew up in Canada, and we have junior kindergarten and senior kindergarten, they call it. And junior kindergarten is half day. So half of the year you go in the morning and the other half of the year you go in the afternoon, so they can have the kids in there. And then senior kindergarten is all day. So like when I tell people this, they're like, what? Like what sort of like spaceship situation? Yeah. But this is like in the 80s. I mean, how old was I when I went? Yeah. Like this is in like the late 80s. And so just this idea that like people aren't asking in like childcare and accessibility for these systems, they're not asking for people to like figure something out. They're just asking for stuff that has already existed in places for a long time.
Exactly.
To be on the menu for families.
Exactly. And the same thing goes with, maternity leave or paternal leave, like all of these things, but US is so late to the game on. Canada, I worked for a Canadian company, and they are always leading the way when it comes to taking care of their people. So I'm a big fan of a lot of Canadian government and policies and healthcare and everything else. But, it is baffling to me that these things don't exist in the US and can provide so much relief or transition or support for families. So that's something that I feel really passionately about too. But also realize how lucky I am to live where I do, to have the option to send my son to really school that feels good for us.
Yeah. And also too, like you can't discount like how hard you worked to be able to get to a point where you can say, okay, this is the best choice for you, and we can make that happen. Right. Like, so it's not so much that it's like, this is great. Yay. We like bought a house in this neighborhood. Like, yeah, you have to buy the house and you have to like do all those things. So like, it is so much of a lift that before you have kids, you can't even really put those pieces together to be like, oh, hey, we're setting all of this up. I mean, typically, I think some people.
Yeah. I mean,
some
we lived
people
in
do
New York
that.
for 6 years. We were married, but we were in our late 20s, early 30s. And I remember thinking, we're totally going to own a brownstone one day, and our kids are going to take their little backpacks down the brownstone with the trees. It's going to be beautiful. And then it started to become less and less possible in my mind. And then when we moved here and had kids, I was like, there's no way that would have worked for me. I know it works for people and I am blown away, but it's just like knowing myself now, I'm like, I had this idea that things were going to work out that way and they didn't. Now they were even better in my mind. But
Yeah.
I kind of had to let go of some of that once we transitioned from urban to suburban life.
Yeah. But it's good, right? Like it's sort of like it all washes out in the end in a good way and in a way that meets your need. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's kind of the fun part of life.
Yeah. And I think too, like in terms of like the transition in parenting and working and things like that, like there is so much focus right now on this newborn care and maternity leave and paternity leave and those things like that. And I am hopeful that once that becomes, I mean, I think we're at a stage, right, where people are like, we acknowledge that this is a problem and we need this to happen. But then that transition phase of like school days go from 9 to 3, but work isn't a 9 to 3. And like, at what point are we going to start to get into that systemic issue that informs all of these other things? And like, you know, the butterfly effect of like, maybe if we really nail down this, how do we move that?
Yes, that's a very good point. There's probably some other good examples of things that are, you know, beyond what we're talking about now that have happened over time. It's just the process. And I feel like we can all use our voice as parents to make those things happen as much as we can.
Love it. I love it. Well, I think that, I just think it's so refreshing when people are like, you know, here is what happened and here's how we're gonna like do this and change this and make this different and make this better. And like, I think the more voices that get added to it versus this idea of like the lemmings kind of way, right? It's like you go and you have, you know, you work and you have kids and you go back to work and this is just what it is. And it's like, it's awful, right? Like, because that's, I mean, so much of the rhetoric around it has not been positive. It's like, it's just awful. But it doesn't always have to be this way. So like the more people that speak out and say like, these are the things that would have really helped me. And these are the ways that I'm like, you're not just saying like, oh, I did this. You're saying like, I want to open up these conversations for people that I work with so that they don't have the same experience I do. So I think that is part of the magic.
I think so too. And people always ask for parenting advice and I was like, I don't remember anything and I don't have anything. And I couldn't tell you like what, I have no idea when he started crawling or any of that. Like, I just don't know.
Yeah.
But just like love him as much as you can, do the best you can, and take a little time for yourself. And that's really all what it is. I truly have no actual parenting advice.
Yes. I always say yesterday was the easiest day. I'm like, yesterday, it was amazing. I nailed it.
Oh my
Even
God.
if it wasn't, I nailed it.
Yeah. I love that. I'm going to use that yesterday was the best day.
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you so much for joining me. And if there are companies out there who are like, you know what? Yes, I would like to bring on marketing help and figure out what I need to do to get myself from here to SoulCycle. How do they connect with you? How do people find you?
The best way to connect is probably on LinkedIn. This is just Tori Johnston. I think there's a 2 at the end of it on my LinkedIn profile. And yeah, that'd be great. I love to work with companies that are building out brick and mortar concepts or go to market for some other fitness, wellness, or even just female-centric brands. I feel personally really connected to that, and I would love to help.
Awesome. Well, I'll put links in the show notes for everyone. And thank you again for joining me.
Awesome. Thanks, Ashley.